record. I
Oh,
didn't want to do that until you were
I'm not going to do it again.
start from the top. Thank you. I appreciate you going first. That gives everyone else permission and opens up the floor for us.
Hi, I'm so sorry if I missed introductions in our last group. I'm Marissa. I'm a parent from Harrison Park. So I had to, this is one of just like a couple meetings I'm at work, so I'm so sorry I had to run. But yeah, I would love to say, I think like at Harrison Park in particular, one thing that our kids really need is to not like have these like temporary solutions and changes happen every couple of years. I really want us to come up with a sustainable long-term solution that won't be shuffling kids around every couple of years from our school. Like they deserve to have the stability that all other schools have. And so I really want us to not like just be putting a band-aid on something and to adequately enroll the school, not say we're gonna table this and come back, oh, we didn't have enough time to talk about it. Like we really need to do something sustainable this time.
Thank you, Marissa. I can hear your words behind your words. It's a tough subject.
Yeah, I think to echo what Sam and Marissa said, I think what all children, what all children need to be successful in school is essentially the same, right? It needs like committed teachers and administrative staff. They need school supplies. They need access to special programs like library and music and physical education, computer training, although everyone's got computers now. Which has been great. I think that I have two students at Glencoe, and I think for the most part, Glencoe provides those things to our kids. Historically, I don't think you have to look very far to see that a lot of those kind of benefits haven't been available at lower, socioeconomic demographics. I guess maybe a good example would be like school fundraising. And Portland, I think, is really at the forefront of that because they distribute fundraising, right? Over a certain dollar amount, it goes into a general pool that gets distributed, which is not done in a lot of places. So, I mean, that's a good step. But, low class numbers, right? Higher enrollment. You still have a limited number of FTEs for the teachers, and that brings the class sizes up. So students having access to teachers, I think, is really important. And making sure that all of those resources are distributed fairly, which is not necessarily equally. And I have twins, and they're always like, that's not fair. And I always say it's not equal. It's not fair, right? And there's a difference between those two things. And fair isn't always equal. So trying to kind of balance the books.
I was going to say one of the things that Creston has been struggling with for a long time with our community and families is food insecurity, and it's I think it's how it impacts the school and what is the school's role in that is really recognizing that when students come to school and they haven't had breakfast, they haven't had lunch, they don't know where they're getting their meal for dinner, and it really I think COVID shined a big light on this, and it's a struggle now, even just being able to have a backpack program where we can give students and families food, but parents aren't allowed in the building, and we're not allowed to store things there, and so they have to create different ways to deliver it, to reach out, once the rain starts again, we're going to have to do in tents, and the food is packed in boxes, and the boxes get wet. And so, I mean, there's a big struggle in just making sure that the students have the basic necessity of food, so that they can come to school and be prepared to learn and have that I think one less thing to worry about. So that's our school is helping with that. I mean, I think the free lunches and breakfasts for everyone has been a big help. We have a strong PTA. We have a lot of community organizers. We have good groups that are really helping out our community, but it's a big struggle, and it's a big thing that we have to consider.
Can you see the redistribution affecting this?
Potentially, I think, because when you have food insecurity, or when you struggle providing some of those basic needs for your family, you really have to reach out and depend on others and to build that community. And so then to start to shift who you are connected with and have to reach out again and have to rebuild that foundation can be a challenge. And then making sure that those programs and those resources are available where those families now have to go is also a thing that I want to make sure that we consider, and that we still are able to offer those programs for support for that entire community, not just, for the kids that go to school in this one zone. So it's interesting thinking about the school helping to provide that, but it is such a connection point and a resource that, touches on so many people in our community and is a place of, hopefully a place of trust and support. So yeah, I see the redistricting or the reboundary piece could be problematic for a good majority of our families. Not to bring it down at all here.
I appreciate you speaking. How about other communities? Are you impacted by inequity, or how do you see it? How do you see it show up? Oh, that's a very cute crown.
Yes. That happens when you have your kindergarten with you in the meeting. Oh,
My favorite part about virtual.
yeah. Hey, the queen.
Mm.
You are the queen.
Oh, that was the best.
I love you. I thought I was muted, sorry. I think for our community, I'm an immigrant, and a lot of our people in our community are immigrants as well, or are in the same situation in which we have mixed racial relationships, in which you have one parent who's white or of another race, and as well Latinx, since we work in we're in a Spanish DLI school. And for us has been, what we need is to hold on to our cultural identity. I think that is something that is very important for us in Spanish DLI schools, is to be able to hold on to who we are culturally, and to be able to hold on to a little bit of our roots when it feels like schools are not necessarily spaces where that's able to be done. You know, you're focused on curriculum and standards and lesson objectives and unit plans and making sure everybody is on top of everything and IEPs, 504s, all that good stuff, right? And culture doesn't really play a role in maintainment of that. And I think Atkinson has done a really good job in making sure that that exists with our parent advocacy group and our resiliency fund, and making sure there are clear pathways for Spanish dominant communities to be able to access not only tools and resources, but each other. Which is, so the schools are not just for teachers and students, they're also for communities. So I think any changes that affect that will greatly affect our community and in both positive and negative ways. So
Thank you so much. Can you, how could you see it going well? If in your greatest hopes and dreams, what would it look like if
in my greatest hopes and dreams, it would be an increase of DLI programming throughout PPS. I think DLI or dual language or multiple language is the norm in many other well-developed countries. And it's truly sad that it's not here in the USA. So, and we see that although I was looking at the charts, although enrollment looks like it has decreased at Atkinson for Spanish DLI, that's because the numbers of people that are in the classroom are capped, not necessarily because there's a lack of demand, right? So there is always wait lists for DLI programs. There's always somebody that wants to take a spot. So the demand for other programming that is not, that is either focus options like creative science or Sunnyside is always there, but there's not enough. For us in PPS, what I notice is a lack of trained dual language teachers. So there's not enough resources to create a demand, to satisfy the demand that is found within the communities. I think all of us would love if our children spoke other languages and would have PBL, problem-based learning. And those are just basics of education that every child should have, along with having school supplies in school and food and, you know, a good playground. Oh, by the way, our playground, the bridge part of it was burned. So we don't have a working playground right now. Yeah, so those are things that, you know, are necessary. And as well, Atkinson has a intensive skills program in which there's students that are not been able to be part of the mainstream classroom. And there's a great partnership that has been developed between the mainstream classroom and intensive skills classrooms that could be lost. That would be sad. So.
Thank you for your voice. My mentor says that one voice changes the room and the room changes the world. Still have about 15 more minutes.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer to your question. But I'm wondering, is that more a function of like changes that would need to be made to curriculum as opposed to redistributing students? You know, because if there's a limit to the number of instructors that you have for this program, moving kids around isn't gonna like help that. I mean, there must be like a minimum number of, so I'm just wondering how that, is there a plan to address those two things at the same time? Or could there be? Or are we considering those things?
Do you think that they could be? Can you have both and?
Well, I mean, if there was some, just kind of again to follow up on what Martha said, that if there was a way to, at the end, there was a lot about how the integration of the different programs seems to, it broadens the community, right? So it's not just the DS or the DLI and the neighborhood, it's the entire school. So I'm wondering if is there a way to integrate them more seamlessly, so neighborhood kids would be in classes with DLI students. And I don't know if that's happening already, but I could see how, if that were to happen, it would spread the load on the DLI and the focus schools as well, right? It would spread it out to the other students.
I think that's the desire of a lot of school. Like that happens in our kinder and first grade levels, but I don't know if it's found in the older grades just because they had to prepare for state testing. And a lot of the teachers in the DLI programs are not only teaching their language, but at third grade, they're teaching how to read and write in English too. So they're prepared to take the state test, right? So there's not as much opportunity to be able to collaborate after third grade. I think teachers try to do their best, of course. I'm always a big fan of teachers. I think they're the greatest. But I think, I don't know, I think as a community, we need to do a better job of listening to one another in a way that's also responsive by systems. And rather than thinking of individuals, we think of what would benefit whole communities, right? And how can systems make sure that they're listening to whole communities without creating stopgap measures or gatekeeping or moving a lot of things without having full responses of what the community wants, Like, I think calling people by phone is great, but are all the people being able contacted in their native languages? Is phone the best tool? Is email the best tool? I don't know. I just think there's so much more that we can do if we were able to get a united vision.
Well, sure, you could add that to the hopes and fears discussion, right? The issue of retention and employment and numbers of teachers. People might be smarter about those numbers. I'm in healthcare, and everyone's leaving, and so we have a industry like that here with education and how that role has changed and whatnot, and what future numbers for 25, 26 of teachers looks like, and all that stuff. I understand that's probably being factored into, but the greatest hope is that you're staffed up, and the greatest fear is that best laid plans are not met with the correct workforce.
I don't have much to add that hasn't already been said about the first question, but with the second question, one of my great hopes and kind of the other side of it is great fear. It's like a coin with two different sides, is that we could hopefully overcome some inequities that exist between the schools by rebalancing. But my fear is that we won't, and we'll just shift the inequities around and possibly unintentionally end up making it worse for some people who maybe are already struggling to begin with. And I don't know if that's unavoidable or not, but that is something I worry about in this process.
take the other side of the coin and say that I hope that the redistricting increases utility. I have a linear kind of thought process, and when I think about things, if I do this or if I do that, you know, how will the overall utility change? And if I'll get a lot of utility, but someone loses a lot of utility, what's the delta of that? And is it positive or is it negative? And I guess my hope is that decisions are made that most people are happy with or okay with or find acceptable, because getting everyone on the same page is, I think, an unrealistic expectation. But that once those decisions are made and implemented, that overall utility is, the delta is increased, that there's more positive benefit than negative benefit. And I think there is a solution. It's just a matter of, you know, gathering all of the information and then weighing the balances of each of the different, you know, pillars that will go into this. But I'm a glass totally full, half with water, half with air, and I'll maintain that attitude in this as well.
Martha shared in the chat as well. What about student voice and their input as community stakeholders? What share in the vision of what their education should be like? And I'll tell you, part of the listening and learning is with the students. We are looking for their stories. We are listening. We're reaching out and hoping to hear. But anybody else? I'm just going to read it again. What are your children and those in communities most impacted by inequity need to be successful in school? What's missing?
I would say something along the lines of like not witnessing, someone said it earlier, not witnessing a constant string of patchwork measures. You know, the water fountains is a good example of like, we'll just put some tape over it for a while and then we'll take the tape off and just proceed as usual. And you know, it can, especially after COVID, it can probably start to grate on them when it's just, we'll just put duct tape on this again. And it's cool, which is, you know, part of life or whatever, maybe if you're in like the military or whatever, but maybe not, you know, in elementary school. So it's could be a little exhausting further down the line. You know, like I said, maybe just sort of post-COVID more than anything.
How do you think those kids react to tape one day, not tape another, or going to another school that never had tape?
Same as us, throw your hands in the air and be like, you know, we've all had really grown up conversations with our children over the past 2 years about the way the world works. And so you'd hate to explain to them about like the bureaucracy of the school system they're in, and, you know, just the real world situations, and you know how that's how it is. Instead of like cakewalks and whatnot. So, you know, it's interesting.
I guess I might add on that what Sam said as well, is that you know, I've worked in schools long enough that kids are smart. They know when they're given the short end of the stick. They may not like be able to vocalize it or have a concrete thought about it, but they, you know, deep down know. And, you know, as you know, most people of color know, you know, we're used to being ignored. And I guess this kind of ties into both questions, is that, you know, one big fear is that these big decisions will be handed down And PPS will do a big, huge PR campaign, which, you know, they do a lot. I don't, you know, maybe out of necessity or maybe because I don't know why, but, and then so we're, you know, these communities of color are being told like, hey, we decided this is what's good for you. And that's kind of like, you know, on one hand, it's kind of like, oh, there's a short end of the stick again. But on the other hand, it's kind of like, yeah, here we go again. You know, it happens so much. And, you know, it's not necessarily because people are intentional about it. You know, I always give people the benefit of doubt, but just because maybe sometimes people just don't know. And then that also goes in the other thing is that when we're moving people around and distributing, you know, like I like to think like humans are, you know, we're organic, not just like us individuals, but as like groups and communities. So when you set up a DLI program in a school, the community is going to form around it and it's going to be there. And then you'll have people have things that they've never had before. I mean, I'm talking out of personal experience. Like, you know, growing up, I've never heard of a Mandarin immersion program. And here's a chance for my kid to be culturally connected to my family and my heritage. And that's unheard of. And for the first time, I'm like, PPS is actually doing something for people like me. And then suddenly, last year or 2 years ago, they're talking about moving it and throwing everybody into one building, you know, the Spanish program, the Mandarin program in one building. Like, oh, there's segregation again. You know, like it just, you know, I think that's the other point I want to make is that you also be careful because you know, like making decisions you can, or even just the way you talk about it can really be triggering for a lot of people. And, you know, like, I think when we talk about inequity, you know, a lot of people, you know, like students and stuff like that, a lot of it's just, it's not a physical thing, you know, not like curriculum or how, I mean, class number matters, but people, they have an inherent feeling that they're just being moved around like numbers and not treated, you know, for what they're needing. You know, like, you know, said earlier by, I can't remember, you know, like fair is not equal, right? There's people who've been, you know, just felt like they've had the short end of the stick for a while, and maybe it'd be a better thing to be like, hey, maybe, I mean, I know they're trying to, but, you know, in the voices and needs form of point, you know, doing, instead of just telling them like, hey, we're doing it for you, but, you know, showing like, hey, this is, you know, like they need to see it or feel it. And I think that's going to be probably the hardest part. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Eddie. Well said. Martha is snapping. Well said. I really appreciate you sharing that too. We have about 3 more minutes. How about someone we haven't heard from? How do you feel after hearing Eddie say that? That kids and parents feel like they get the short end of the stick and get things granted from on high.
Yeah, I think it's really, this process is so hard because that the same, like the same proposal can feel that way simultaneously to 2 different groups, you know? So, and it's like, yeah, just balancing everyone's needs is incredibly challenging. So, I think we're just going to continue to face that problem. I think that just looking to the future and like setting up as many schools as possible to have, you know, to have adequate enrollment and so that they can have like build community over time and have consistency in the attendance area for the long term and not moving principals around, having consistent long-term leadership is really important to schools that have not had that in recent years.
I think the hard thing in that is we're not able to, if we wanted to just address schools, we could do that. But the reality is that finances and economics and redlining also plays a role in where schools are able to be held, right? And the trend that we're seeing right now is that BIPOC folks who usually have lower earning jobs live in cheaper places, which are usually the outskirts of places, even though it didn't used to be that way. So it's almost historically repeating itself. It went from Bimport to North Portland, to the Chinese immigrant community, to the Latinx community, and it's being pushed out. And we are being told, you can't live here. You're not allowed here. The schools are not for you, right? And I think there's many other things that play a role in decision making that I don't know if necessarily are being taken into account within the history of this.
Thank you so much, Martha. I'm
Welcome back, everyone.